The Power of Solitude. How to stop needing people and start winning alone. Introduction. The secret. Every successful person knows, but nobody talks about. Picture a room. In that room sits every person you've ever admired. The entrepreneurs who built empires from nothing, the leaders who transformed entire industries, the artists whose work moved millions. They're all sitting in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. And if you could listen closely to what they were thinking, you'd discover something shocking. Something nobody taught you in school, nobody posts about on social media, and nobody wants to admit because it goes against everything we've been told about success and connection. This room, filled with billionaires, innovators, and cultural icons, shares one habit that sets them apart from everyone else struggling to make it. It has nothing to do with networking, collaboration, or being surrounded by people constantly. It's the opposite. They've mastered something most of us fear, something society tells us to avoid, something that makes us feel guilty when we crave it. And that something is solitude. I'm talking about the deliberate, strategic, and powerful choice to be alone with your thoughts, your work, and your vision without needing anyone else to validate, approve, or guide you through it. This audiobook will reveal what that secret is, why it works, and most importantly, how you can use it to transform your life starting today, when circumstances are perfect, but right now, in the middle of your chaos and frustration. Let me ask you something. You're surrounded by people, yet you feel profoundly alone, don't you? As if no one truly understands what you're trying to build or who you're trying to become. You seek validation from colleagues, friends, family, even strangers on the internet, hoping their approval will fill the void. But it never does. The more you chase it, the emptier you feel. You've tried to be independent, to stand on your own, to stop caring what others think. But every time you take a step toward true autonomy, guilt creeps in. It whispers that you're being selfish, that you're pushing people away, that you should be more connected and more available. And so you stay stuck in this exhausting cycle, seeking external approval while secretly craving the freedom to just be yourself without apology. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. The most successful people in the world didn't get there by surrounding themselves with crowds or attending every networking event. They got there by mastering the power of solitude. There's a massive difference between loneliness and what I'm describing here. Loneliness is the painful feeling of being disconnected when you desperately want connection. A state that drains you and makes you feel inadequate. Solitude is something entirely different. It's the intentional choice to spend time alone with your thoughts, free from distraction and free from the pressure to perform for others. It fuels you, giving you the mental clarity and emotional strength to build something that actually matters. You've tried to become more independent before. You've read books about not caring what others think, listened to podcasts about self-reliance, maybe even distanced yourself from people who drain your energy. But it didn't work, did it? Because you were fighting against human nature instead of working with it. You were told connection is everything, that you need people to succeed, that asking for help is strength. All of that is true. But nobody told you the other half of the equation. Nobody told you that the most powerful people in the world spend significant time alone. Warren Buffett reads for hours every single day in complete solitude, processing information without distraction or the need for group consensus. Bill Gates takes think weeks, where he isolates himself to read, think, and make the decisions that shaped Microsoft into what it became. Jeff Bezos worked in a garage, building Amazon without committees, without endless meetings, without needing constant validation that his vision was correct. These people didn't avoid connection. They simply understood that the most important work happens when you're alone with your thoughts. And that's what this audiobook is about. You're going to learn how to harness the power of solitude so you can stop needing people and start winning on your own terms. You'll discover how to break free from the exhausting cycle of seeking approval, how to make decisions without second-guessing yourself based on what others might think, and how to build unshakable confidence that doesn't depend on external validation. In the chapters ahead, you'll learn the exact strategies successful people use to turn solitude into their greatest competitive advantage. You'll understand why emotional independence is the foundation of lasting success and how to master your time, money, and emotions without relying on anyone. You'll discover how to build resilience that lets you bounce back faster from any setback, and why the best ideas are almost always born in moments of quiet reflection rather than noisy collaboration. This isn't theory. These are proven, practical, and psychologically backed strategies that will give you the tools to reclaim your power, your time, and your future. You'll learn how to set boundaries without guilt, how to trust yourself completely, and how to use alone time as a weapon for growth rather than an escape from reality. Most people will never understand this. They'll keep chasing crowds, seeking approval, and wondering why they feel so empty despite being surrounded by others. But you're different. You picked up this audiobook because something inside you already knows the truth. That real strength comes from within. That true freedom means becoming complete in yourself. And that the path to extraordinary success often requires walking alone for a while. So here's your choice. You can keep living the way you've been living, exhausting yourself trying to please everyone, making decisions based on what others think, and feeling drained by relationships that take more than they give. Or you can learn what the top 1% already knows, that solitude isn't something to fear, it's something to master. Remember the room I described at the beginning? You belong in it, right now. Because the secret those successful people share isn't about where they came from or how much talent they had. It's about what they chose to do when no one was watching, when no one was validating them, when they were completely and utterly alone with their vision. That's where transformation happens. That's where you discover who you really are and what you're truly capable of. And by the end of this audiobook, you'll know exactly how to get there. Chapter 1. The Solitude Paradox. Why successful people choose to be alone. There's something deeply unsettling about being alone in today's world. We carry devices in our pockets that connect us to billions of people instantly, yet we feel more disconnected than ever. Social media feeds scroll endlessly with images of friends, parties, networking events, and group achievements, all sending the same message. Connection is everything. And if you're alone, something must be wrong with you. This narrative has become so pervasive that even the idea of choosing to be alone feels like admitting failure. Like confessing you couldn't make it in the social game, everyone else seems to be winning. But here's what most people don't understand. The most successful people you know, the ones building empires, creating breakthrough innovations, and living life on their own terms, aren't avoiding solitude. They're actively seeking it. They're protecting it like it's their most valuable resource. And they're using it as a strategic advantage while everyone else is chasing the next networking opportunity or drowning in group chats that drain their mental energy without giving anything meaningful in return. Let me tell you about Jeff Bezos before Amazon became the giant it is today. There was a time when he worked alone in a garage, surrounded by boxes and packing materials, building something most people thought would never work. No team of consultants telling him what to do, no partners second-guessing every decision, no investors breathing down his neck demanding immediate results. He had solitude, and in that solitude, he had the mental space to think clearly, to make bold decisions, and to build the foundation of what would become one of the most valuable companies in history. That garage wasn't a place of loneliness. It was a laboratory for focused, uninterrupted creation. Now contrast that with what most people do. They fill every empty moment with noise, with distractions, with other people's opinions and demands. They check their phones the moment they wake up, scroll through social media while having coffee, attend back-to-back meetings at work, come home to family obligations, and fall asleep with the television on because silence feels uncomfortable. There's no space to think, no room to process their own thoughts, and certainly no opportunity to develop the kind of clarity that comes only from spending time alone with your own mind. Here's where it gets interesting. Scientists have been studying the effects of solitude on the human brain, and what they've discovered challenges everything we've been told about the importance of constant connection. Research from 2024 shows that regular periods of solitude actually increase activity in the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for self-reflection, creativity, and complex problem-solving. When you're alone and your mind isn't being bombarded with external stimuli, your brain enters a state that allows for deeper thinking, pattern recognition, and the kind of insights that simply can't happen when you're surrounded by other people's energy and expectations. But there's a critical distinction we need to make here, one that changes everything. Solitude and loneliness are two completely different experiences, even though people often confuse them or use the terms interchangeably. Loneliness is a state of distress that occurs when you're separated from others and desperately want connection. It's painful, it's draining, and it's associated with negative health outcomes ranging from depression to cardiovascular disease. Loneliness makes you feel like something essential is missing, like you're incomplete without others around you. Solitude is something else entirely. It's the intentional choice to spend time alone, and instead of causing distress, it creates restoration. When you're in a state of true solitude, you're not running from people. You're running toward yourself. You're giving your mind the space it needs to recharge, to process experiences, to generate ideas, and to develop the kind of self-knowledge that only comes from quiet reflection. Solitude energizes you, clarifies your thinking, and strengthens your sense of who you are, independent of anyone else's influence or approval. The difference matters because it determines whether being alone makes you weaker or stronger. Loneliness weakens you by making you feel inadequate and desperate for external validation. Solitude strengthens you by giving you the mental and emotional resources to stand firm in your own identity and purpose. Successful people understand this distinction instinctively, which is why they don't just tolerate being alone. They actively create opportunities for it, often fiercely protecting their alone time from well-meaning people who want to fill every moment with social interaction. Think about what happens in your typical day. How many moments of genuine solitude do you have? And I don't mean being physically alone while scrolling through your phone, consuming other people's content, or being available to respond to messages. I mean true solitude where you're disconnected from external input and fully present with your own thoughts. For most people, the answer is zero. They wake up to notifications, spend their commute listening to podcasts or music, work in open offices surrounded by colleagues, come home to family or roommates, and end the day watching streaming content until they fall asleep. There's literally no space for their own mind to exist without external influence. This constant connection comes with a cost that most people don't recognize until it's too late. Your brain never gets the chance to consolidate information, to make sense of your experiences, or to figure out what you actually think about anything. You're consuming everyone else's thoughts, reacting to everyone else's problems, and making decisions based on group consensus rather than your own carefully considered judgment. You become a passenger in your own life, going through the motions, but never really connecting with your deeper purpose or potential. Here's the practical reality successful people have figured out. Solitude isn't a luxury or a personality trait. It's a skill you can develop, and once you do, it becomes one of your greatest competitive advantages. They've created what I call the solitude reset, a daily practice of spending at least 20 minutes in complete solitude, away from devices, other people, and external demands. This isn't meditation, though meditation can be part of it. This is simply time spent alone with your thoughts, allowing your mind to wander, to process, and to connect dots that constant stimulation keeps scattered. The technique is deceptively simple. Find a space where you won't be interrupted, turn off all devices, and sit with yourself for 20 minutes. No agenda, no goals, no pressure to be productive or figure anything out. Just you and your thoughts. In the beginning, this will feel uncomfortable, even painful. Your mind will race, you'll feel restless, you'll want to check your phone or do something that feels more useful. That discomfort is actually a good sign. It means you've been avoiding this kind of solitude, and your brain is adjusting to an unfamiliar state. But if you push through that initial discomfort and make this a daily practice, something remarkable begins to happen. You start noticing thoughts and insights that were always there but drowned out by constant noise. You begin to understand your own reactions and patterns more clearly. You develop a sense of inner calm that doesn't depend on external circumstances or other people's validation. And perhaps most importantly, you build the mental muscle of being comfortable with yourself, which is the foundation of genuine confidence and self-sufficiency. Jeff Bezos wasn't special because he was smarter than everyone else or because he had some genetic advantage. He was special because he understood that the most important work happens in solitude, where you can think without compromise, create without judgment, and develop ideas without the diluting effect of group consensus. That garage wasn't a limitation. It was exactly the environment he needed to build something extraordinary. Now here's what you need to understand before you take this further. 90% of people who try to embrace solitude make one critical mistake that sabotages the entire process. And if you're not aware of this trap, you'll fall into it too. They confuse solitude with isolation, and the difference between these two states will determine whether you grow stronger or spiral into depression. We'll explore that trap and how to avoid it. But first, you need to know that choosing solitude doesn't mean rejecting people or becoming a hermit. It means becoming someone who doesn't need constant connection to feel whole, someone who can stand alone when necessary, and someone whose best work happens in the quiet spaces between all the noise. That's where real power lives. That's where transformation happens. And that's what we're building toward in everything that follows. Chapter 2. Breaking Free. How Successful Leaders Stop Needing Validation. There's a moment that defines every successful person's journey. A turning point that separates those who build empires from those who spend their lives seeking permission to exist. It's the moment they stop asking for approval and start trusting their own judgment. Most people never reach that moment. They spend decades waiting for someone to validate their ideas, confirm their worth, or give them permission to pursue what they really want. And they wonder why success always feels just out of reach. The addiction to external validation is one of the most destructive patterns in modern life. Yet almost nobody recognizes they have it. You check how many likes your post got before you've even finished your morning coffee. You make career decisions based on what your parents will think. You avoid taking risks because you're terrified of what people will say if you fail. You've built an entire life around managing other people's opinions, and somewhere along the way, you lost touch with your own. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every minute you spend seeking validation from others is a minute you're not spending building something real. Every decision you make based on group consensus is a decision that gets diluted, compromised, and ultimately weakened. And every time you change direction because someone questioned your judgment, you're training yourself to distrust the one person whose opinion should matter most: yourself. Warren Buffett understood this principle earlier than most. While Wall Street analysts obsessed over quarterly earnings and market trends, Buffett sat in Omaha reading financial statements in solitude, making investment decisions that contradicted everything the experts were saying. When the dot-com bubble was inflating in the late 1990s and everyone was getting rich on technology stocks, Buffett refused to follow the crowd. Financial media called him washed up, out of touch, irrelevant. His firm's stock underperformed the market dramatically, and critics lined up to explain why his approach no longer worked in the new economy. Buffett didn't defend himself. He didn't change his strategy to match popular opinion. He didn't need Wall Street's validation to know his analysis was sound. He continued doing exactly what he'd always done, making decisions based on his own careful research and judgment, regardless of whether anyone else agreed. And when the bubble burst in 2000, destroying trillions in wealth, Buffett's approach was vindicated so completely that the same critics who dismissed him rushed to praise his wisdom. But here's the key point. He would have continued with his strategy even if the critics had been right, because his confidence came from internal analysis, not external approval. Think about how different that is from how most people operate. You have an idea for a business, but before you even test it, you poll everyone you know for their opinion. Your friend thinks it won't work. Your spouse worries about the risk. Your former colleague points out 3 ways it could fail. So you either abandon the idea entirely or modify it so much to address everyone's concerns that it becomes something you're no longer excited about. You've let other people's fears and limitations define what's possible for you. Or consider how you make career decisions. You're offered a promotion that requires relocating to a new city. Instead of sitting with the decision yourself, weighing what you truly want against what you're willing to sacrifice, you immediately start asking everyone else what they think you should do. Your parents worry about you being far from family. Your friends don't want you to leave. Your mentor questions whether it's the right move for your long-term career. By the time you've collected all these opinions, you're so confused and anxious that you can't remember what you actually wanted in the first place. Here's what's really happening in these moments. You've outsourced your decision-making to people who aren't living your life, who don't share your vision, and who can't possibly understand the full context of what you're trying to build. You've made them responsible for your choices, which means you've also given them power over your future. And when things don't work out, you'll resent them for leading you astray, even though you're the one who asked for their opinion in the first place. The psychology behind this pattern runs deep. From the time you were a child, you learned that approval means safety. When your parents praised you, you felt secure. When teachers validated your work, you felt capable. When peers accepted you, you felt worthy. Your brain developed a powerful association between external validation and survival, which made perfect sense in childhood when you actually did depend on others for your basic needs. But somewhere along the way, you were supposed to develop internal validation, the ability to assess your own worth, trust your own judgment, and stand by your own decisions regardless of what others think. Most people never make that transition. So you enter adulthood with a child's need for approval, constantly seeking from bosses, partners, and friends the validation you should be giving yourself. You've become addicted to the dopamine hit that comes from praise, from likes, from external confirmation that you're doing okay. And like any addiction, you need increasingly larger doses to get the same effect. No amount of validation is ever enough because you haven't developed the internal foundation that makes external approval unnecessary. Successful leaders break this pattern by developing what I call the internal compass, a practice of making decisions based on their own values, analysis, and judgment rather than other people's reactions. The technique starts with a simple but powerful question. If nobody would ever know about this decision, what would I choose? This question cuts through all the noise of what others might think and gets directly to what you actually want. When you're facing a decision, whether it's a career move, a business strategy, or a personal choice, take time alone to answer that question honestly. Not what would impress people, not what would avoid criticism, not what would make you look good on social media. What would you choose if the only consequence was living with the decision yourself, with no external judgment at all? The first few times you do this, you might discover you don't actually know what you want. Years of seeking external validation have disconnected you from your own desires and judgment. That's okay. That recognition is actually progress, because it means you're starting to see the pattern. Keep practicing, keep asking the question, keep sitting in the discomfort of not immediately knowing what others think. As you develop this internal compass, something remarkable begins to happen. Decisions that used to paralyze you become clearer. You stop wasting energy trying to predict and manage everyone else's reactions. You take action faster because you're not waiting for permission or consensus. And perhaps most importantly, you start trusting yourself in a way that makes you genuinely confident rather than dependent on constant reassurance. Let me tell you about a CEO I know who perfectly embodies this principle. Her company was struggling, and the board of directors pressured her to lay off a significant portion of her workforce to cut costs. Industry analysts agreed. Her CFO presented data supporting the decision. Everyone around her was saying the same thing. Layoffs were necessary for survival. But she looked at the situation differently. She believed the company's problems weren't about having too many people, but about having the wrong strategy. She thought if she could pivot the business model while keeping the team intact, they could turn things around. She faced a choice: follow the conventional wisdom that everyone was pushing, which would protect her reputation if things went wrong because she could say she did what the experts recommended, or trust her own analysis and risk catastrophic failure if she was wrong, with no one to blame but herself. She chose her own judgment. She kept the team, changed the strategy, and spent 6 months in intense uncertainty while everyone waited to see if she'd been foolish or visionary. 18 months later, the company had tripled its revenue, and the same board members who'd pushed for layoffs were praising her bold leadership. But here's what most people miss when they hear stories like that. Her willingness to trust herself didn't come from arrogance or from being certain she was right. It came from spending years developing the skill of internal validation, of making decisions based on her own careful analysis rather than needing external approval. She'd practiced on smaller decisions countless times before facing that high-stakes moment. She'd built the mental muscle of trusting herself even when others disagreed. And when the critical moment came, that muscle was strong enough to support her. You can build that same muscle, starting with the decisions you face today. The next time you catch yourself about to ask someone else what they think you should do, pause. Sit with the question yourself first. Do your own analysis. Reach your own conclusion. Then, if you still want input from others, you'll be seeking advice rather than seeking permission. And that distinction changes everything. The path to genuine self-sufficiency begins with learning to trust your own judgment more than you trust other people's opinions. It's not about never listening to advice or refusing to consider other perspectives. It's about developing the internal foundation that allows you to evaluate those perspectives from a place of confidence, rather than desperation for approval. It's about becoming someone whose sense of worth and direction comes from within, making you genuinely independent in the way that matters most. And here's what nobody tells you about that transformation. Once you stop needing validation, people actually respect you more, not less. They sense the difference between someone who's constantly seeking approval and someone who's comfortable in their own judgment. That inner certainty becomes magnetic in a world full of people who are desperately trying to figure out what everyone else wants them to be. But independence from external validation is only part of the equation. You can trust your own judgment and still be controlled by something even more insidious: your own emotional reactions. That's the next frontier we need to explore. Because emotional self-sufficiency is what transforms intellectual independence into actual power in your daily life. Chapter 3. Emotional Independence. What top performers know about feelings. Your emotions are not your enemy, but they're also not your friend. They're signals, data points, pieces of information about your internal state, and nothing more. Yet most people treat them as commands that must be obeyed immediately, as if feeling anxious means you should avoid taking action, or feeling angry means you should lash out, or feeling uncertain means you should abandon your plans. This emotional reactivity keeps you trapped in patterns that sabotage your success and destroy your peace of mind. The difference between people who build extraordinary lives and people who stay stuck isn't that successful people don't feel emotions. They feel everything you feel: fear, doubt, frustration, anger, anxiety. The difference is they've developed emotional independence, the ability to feel emotions without being controlled by them, to acknowledge what they're experiencing without letting it dictate their decisions or derail their progress. They've learned to observe their emotional state the way a pilot observes weather conditions, important information to consider, but not something that makes them abandon the destination. Think about what happens when you're emotionally dependent on others. You have a difficult day at work, so you immediately call your partner or best friend, needing them to make you feel better. Someone criticizes you online, and you spend hours seeking reassurance from people who agree with you. You feel anxious about a decision, so you poll everyone you know until someone tells you what you want to hear. You've made other people responsible for managing your emotional state, which means you're never really in control of how you feel. This pattern creates a dangerous vulnerability. When those people aren't available or when they refuse to give you the comfort you're seeking, your emotional state collapses. You become unable to function because you haven't developed the internal capacity to process your own feelings. You're like someone who never learned to cook and now panics every time they're hungry because they depend entirely on others to feed them. Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian in history, understood something about emotional management that gave him an almost unfair advantage over his competitors. Before major races, when the pressure was at its peak and every other swimmer was visibly nervous, Phelps would sit alone, headphones on, running through a mental routine he'd practiced thousands of times. He wasn't trying to eliminate the nervousness or pump himself up with positive affirmations. He was acknowledging what he felt, accepting it as natural, and then choosing to focus his attention on the process he'd trained for, rather than the emotions trying to hijack his performance. His coach once revealed that Phelps practiced this emotional regulation technique more than he practiced his swimming strokes. He'd deliberately create stressful situations in training, then work on maintaining his focus and composure despite the discomfort. By the time he got to the Olympics, Managing his emotional state under pressure was as automatic as his flip turns. The nervousness was still there. He just wasn't controlled by it anymore. Now contrast that with how most people handle emotional challenges. You feel stressed about a presentation, so you spend the night before worrying instead of preparing. You feel hurt by something someone said, so you ruminate on it for days, replaying the conversation and imagining different responses. You feel overwhelmed by your to-do list, so you avoid everything and watch Netflix instead, which only makes the overwhelm worse. You're letting emotions make decisions for you. And emotions are terrible decision makers because they're designed for survival, not for success. Here's the neuroscience behind this pattern. Your emotional responses originate in the limbic system, the ancient part of your brain that evolved to keep you alive in immediate physical danger. When this system detects a potential threat, it triggers the fight or flight response. Elevated heart rate, cortisol release, narrowed attention, and an overwhelming urge to either attack the threat or run from it. This system was perfect for dealing with predators on the savannah. It's completely unsuited for navigating modern challenges like career decisions, relationship conflicts, or building a business. But your brain doesn't know the difference between a lion chasing you and your boss criticizing your work. It responds to both with the same emergency protocol, flooding your system with stress hormones and compelling you to react immediately. If you haven't developed the skill of emotional regulation, you'll obey that compulsion every single time. You'll send the angry email. You'll quit the challenging project. You'll avoid the uncomfortable conversation. And you'll wonder why your life keeps cycling through the same destructive patterns. Emotional independence means developing a different relationship with these signals. Instead of treating every emotional impulse as something that requires immediate action, you create space between the feeling and your response. You notice the anxiety, acknowledge that your brain is perceiving something as threatening, and then consciously decide whether that perception is accurate and whether the emotional response is helpful. Most of the time, it's not. There's a practice that high performers use for developing this skill called the emotion audit, and it's deceptively simple. 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening, you pause for 2 minutes and write down exactly what you're feeling in that moment. Not what you think you should be feeling, not a story about why you're feeling it, just the raw emotion itself. I feel anxious. I feel frustrated. I feel energized. That's it. The power in this practice comes from 2 things. First, it trains you to notice your emotional state as it's happening rather than being completely consumed by it. When you can observe yourself feeling anxious, you're no longer just anxious. You're someone who's experiencing anxiety, which creates psychological distance and gives you back some control. Second, over time, you start noticing patterns. You discover that your anxiety spikes at certain times of day, that your frustration follows specific triggers, that your energy has predictable cycles. Once you see the patterns, they lose their power to control you. Consider the story of a hedge fund manager who used this technique to transform his performance. He managed billions of dollars, and the pressure was destroying him. He'd wake up at 3 a.m. with his heart racing, unable to stop thinking about positions that were losing money. During market hours, his emotional state would swing wildly based on minute-to-minute price movements. He was making reactive decisions, cutting positions too early when fear spiked, holding too long when he couldn't accept being wrong, and generally letting his emotions sabotage his strategy. He started doing the emotion audit, setting alarms on his phone for 9 a.m., 12 p.m., and 3 p.m. The first week was brutal because he had to confront just how emotionally reactive he'd become. But as he continued the practice, something shifted. He began noticing the anxiety before it completely hijacked his thinking. He'd feel it rising and think, "There's the fear response," instead of immediately acting on it. Within a month, his decision-making had improved so dramatically that his returns jumped by 20%. More importantly, he stopped waking up at 3 a.m. because he developed the internal capacity to process his emotional state without needing to frantically do something about it. This is what emotional self-sufficiency looks like. It's not about becoming cold or emotionless. It's about developing such a strong relationship with your own internal experience that you don't need other people to regulate it for you, and you don't let it make decisions that your rational mind should be making. You feel everything fully, but you're no longer controlled by what you feel. There's a second technique that builds on this foundation, particularly useful for moments of intense emotional reactivity. It's called the 90-second rule, based on research showing that the physiological response to an emotion, the actual chemical cascade in your body, lasts about 90 seconds if you don't feed it with your thoughts. After that initial surge, what keeps the emotion going is the story you tell yourself about it. When you notice a strong emotion arising, especially anger or anxiety, commit to doing absolutely nothing for 90 seconds. Don't send the message. Don't make the call. Don't quit. Don't decide. Just breathe and observe what's happening in your body. Notice your heart rate. Feel the tension in your shoulders. Observe the thoughts trying to pull you into reactive behavior. But don't act on any of it for 90 seconds. What you'll discover is remarkable. After that minute and a half, the intensity drops significantly. The compulsion to react immediately loosens its grip. You create space where choice becomes possible again. The situation hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. And that makes all the difference between emotional reaction and intentional response. Top performers in every field have mastered this principle. They feel the pressure, the fear, the frustration, but they've developed such strong emotional self-regulation that these feelings inform their actions without controlling them. They're not at the mercy of their emotional state because they've built the internal infrastructure to manage it independently. And here's what makes this particularly powerful when combined with the solitude we discussed earlier. When you spend regular time alone with your thoughts, you become intimately familiar with your emotional patterns. You notice how certain thoughts trigger certain feelings. You see how your energy fluctuates throughout the day. You understand your triggers and vulnerabilities in a way that's impossible when you're constantly distracted by other people and external stimulation. That self-knowledge becomes the foundation for emotional mastery. But emotional independence is only valuable if you have the time and space to actually use it. You can be emotionally self-sufficient and still be controlled by something external, the demands on your schedule. That's where the next piece of self-sufficiency becomes critical. Because if you don't control your time, someone else will. And all the emotional mastery in the world won't matter if you're spending your days doing what everyone else wants instead of what actually moves your life forward. Chapter 4. Time Mastery. How self-reliant people own their schedule. Time is the only resource you can never get back, yet most people treat it like it's infinite. They say yes to meetings that don't matter, spend hours in group chats that go nowhere, and give their best energy to other people's priorities while their own goals sit waiting for some day that never comes. They're busy, exhausted, and perpetually behind, wondering why they never make progress on what actually matters to them. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't control your time, someone else will. Your boss will fill it with tasks that benefit the company, but not your growth. Your family will consume it with demands that make them comfortable, but leave you depleted. Your friends will take it for granted, expecting you to be available whenever they need something, regardless of what you're trying to build. And you'll arrive at the end of each day, wondering where the hours went and why you have nothing to show for them. Self-reliant people operate differently. They understand that time is the raw material of life, and how you spend it determines who you become and what you create. They guard their time with the same ferocity that people guard their bank accounts, because they know that once it's spent, it's gone forever. They've made peace with the fact that protecting their time means disappointing people, declining invitations, and sometimes being seen as unavailable or antisocial. They've decided their future is more important than everyone else's comfort. Elon Musk runs multiple companies simultaneously, yet he's known for his intense focus and productivity. His secret isn't working more hours than everyone else, though he does work a lot. It's his approach to time blocking, a method where every minute of his day is scheduled in advance, typically in 5-minute increments. He doesn't leave his schedule open to see what happens. He decides in advance what deserves his attention, protects those blocks fiercely, and refuses to let other people's urgencies hijack his priorities. This might sound extreme, and it is. But consider what happens when you don't control your schedule. You show up to work and immediately start responding to emails, letting other people's priorities determine your focus for the day. You agree to a lunch meeting because someone asks, even though it serves no purpose for your goals. You spend your evening scrolling social media because you're too drained to work on your side project, which means another day passes without progress. Your time is being spent, but you're not the one spending it. The difference between people who control their time and people who are controlled by it comes down to one fundamental choice. Are you living reactively or proactively? Reactive people let circumstances and other people determine how their time gets used. Someone calls, they answer. Someone needs something, they provide it. An opportunity comes up, they say yes without considering what they're saying no to. They're constantly responding to life instead of directing it. Proactive people decide in advance what deserves their time and defend those decisions against everything else. They understand that every yes to something trivial is a no to something important. They've identified the few activities that actually move their life forward and ruthlessly protect time for those activities, treating them as non-negotiable appointments with their own future. The technique that successful people use for this is called deep work solitude, and it's built on a simple but powerful principle. The most valuable work you do requires uninterrupted focus in an environment free from distraction. This means blocking off substantial chunks of time, minimum 2 hours, where you're completely unavailable to everyone else. Phone off, door closed, email shut down, no meetings, no interruptions, just you and the work that actually matters. Most people never experience this kind of focused productivity because they've never tried it. They assume they can get deep work done in the gaps between meetings or while monitoring their inbox. They can't. Every interruption, even checking your phone for 30 seconds, breaks your concentration and requires up to 20 minutes to fully recover your focus. This means that working with constant interruptions isn't just less productive. It's fundamentally different work, shallower and less valuable than what becomes possible when you protect your focus. Here's what this looks like in practice. You identify the 3 to 5 hours per week where you do your highest value work, the activities that actually create results rather than just keeping you busy. Maybe it's strategic planning for your business. Maybe it's deep research for your book. Maybe it's the creative work that only you can do. Whatever it is, you schedule those hours in your calendar as sacred time, and you defend them like you'd defend a critical business meeting. When someone tries to schedule something during those blocks, you say no. When people ask for your availability, those times simply don't exist. When unexpected requests come up, your answer is that you can address them after your deep work session, not during it. You've decided that your most important work deserves your best time and full attention, and everything else can wait. The resistance to this approach is immediate and predictable. People will tell you it's unrealistic, that you can't be unavailable for hours at a time, that your job or your family requires constant accessibility. What they're really saying is that they want access to your time on their terms, and your attempt to control your schedule threatens that access. But here's what happens when you actually implement this practice. The urgent requests that supposedly couldn't wait somehow get handled without you. The fires that seem to require your immediate attention turn out to be manageable. And the work you produce during your protected time is so much better than what you were creating in fragmented attention that it justifies every disappointed person who wanted you to be more available. Tom was drowning, not in water, but in meetings. As a software engineer at a growing tech company, his calendar had become a graveyard of productivity. Stand-ups at 9 a.m., planning sessions at 11 a.m., code reviews after lunch, and endless collaboration meetings that left him no time for actual coding. He was working 60-hour weeks and falling behind on every project because the work that required deep concentration was getting squeezed into the gaps between meetings, usually late at night when he was already exhausted. His manager kept emphasizing team collaboration, telling him he needed to be more available, more present in all the discussions. Tom was burning out, producing mediocre work, and questioning whether he even belonged in the field anymore. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd become a software engineer because he loved building things in solitude, and now he spent his days talking about building things instead of actually building them. Then he made a decision that his colleagues thought was career suicide. He blocked off his mornings, every morning from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., as completely unavailable. No meetings, no exceptions, no negotiations. He told his team that he'd be offline during those hours and would catch up on everything afterward. He turned off Slack, silenced his phone, and disappeared into his code. The initial reaction was exactly what he expected. People complained about his lack of availability. His manager questioned his commitment to collaboration. Colleagues worried about being blocked by his unavailability, predicting that projects would stall because Tom was being difficult. But he held firm, treating those morning hours as sacred, and something remarkable happened. Within 3 weeks, nobody could argue with the results. The complex problems that had been dragging on for months got solved during his morning deep work sessions. The code quality of his contributions jumped dramatically because he was writing it in a state of flow rather than in fragmented 15-minute chunks between interruptions. He went from the struggling team member everyone worried about to the most productive engineer on the team, all because he took control of his time and defended it ruthlessly. Your time is like your emotional energy or your money. If you don't decide how it gets spent, other people will decide for you, and their decisions will serve their interests, not yours. The technique of deep work solitude gives you back that control, but it requires something most people aren't willing to do. You have to disappoint people who expect you to always be available. There's another enemy of time mastery that successful people have learned to identify and eliminate. Energy vampires. The people and activities that drain your time without providing anything valuable in return. These are the colleagues who stop by your desk for just a quick question that turns into a 30-minute conversation about nothing. The friends who call in crisis mode every week with the same problems they refuse to solve. The meetings that could have been an email. The social obligations you attend out of guilt rather than genuine desire. Self-reliant people audit their time the same way they audit their emotions. They look at where their hours actually go and ask brutal questions. Is this person or activity adding value to my life? or just taking time? Am I attending this meeting because it matters, or because saying no feels uncomfortable? Am I available to this person because the relationship is valuable, or because I haven't set boundaries? The answers often reveal that a significant portion of their time is being consumed by things that don't deserve it. The solution is simple, but not easy. You create what top performers call sacred hours, time blocks that are protected not just from work interruptions, but from everything that doesn't align with your priorities. These might be your morning workout, your evening reading time, your weekend hours for your side business, or your monthly planning sessions. Whatever they are, you treat them as non-negotiable appointments with your future self. And you defend them with the same energy you defend a critical meeting with your biggest client. When someone tries to claim those hours, your answer is consistent. I'm not available then. You don't apologize, you don't explain, you don't offer excessive justification. You simply communicate that those hours aren't open for negotiation. Most people will respect this boundary once they realize you're serious about it. The ones who don't respect it are revealing something important. They value their access to your time more than they value your goals and well-being. That's valuable information that should inform how much access they get going forward. The transformation that comes from mastering your time is profound. When you control your schedule instead of being controlled by it, you start making real progress on your goals. You stop feeling like a passenger in your own life. You build the discipline and self-respect that come from honoring your commitments to yourself. And you create the space for the kind of focused, uninterrupted work that produces results nobody can ignore. But controlling your time is only powerful if you have the financial freedom to back up your decisions. You can protect your schedule and work on your priorities. But if you're trapped by financial dependence, on a job you hate, on people who control your income, on a lifestyle that requires every dollar you earn, your time mastery is still limited. That's where the next dimension of self-sufficiency becomes essential, because real freedom requires both time and money working together. Chapter 5. Financial Self-Reliance. The Millionaire's Hidden Strategy. You can master your time and control your emotions, but if you're financially dependent on someone else, you're not truly free. Financial dependence is the invisible chain that keeps people trapped in situations they hate, accepting treatment they don't deserve, and postponing dreams they claim to care about. It doesn't matter how emotionally independent you are if you can't leave a toxic job because you need the paycheck. It doesn't matter how well you manage your time if every hour of it is owned by creditors, obligations, and a lifestyle you can't afford to maintain. The connection between self-sufficiency and wealth isn't about becoming rich for its own sake. It's about building enough financial independence that you can make decisions based on what's right for your life, rather than what's necessary for your survival. It's about creating options where others see only obligations. It's about having the freedom to walk away from anything that doesn't serve you, knowing you'll be fine because you've built a foundation that doesn't depend on any single source of income or any person's approval. Ray Dalio built Bridgewater Associates into one of the world's largest hedge funds, not by following conventional wisdom or seeking consensus from partners, but by developing his investment principles in solitude and trusting them completely. He made decisions that often contradicted what everyone else in the financial world was doing. And those contrarian decisions made him billions. But here's what most people miss about his story. The financial independence he built gave him the freedom to make those contrarian bets. He wasn't dependent on pleasing bosses or conforming to industry standards because he owned his income, his decisions, and his future. Financial self-reliance starts with a brutal truth most people don't want to face. If you lose your job tomorrow, how long could you survive? If the answer is less than 6 months, you're not financially independent. You're one bad quarter, one corporate restructuring, one personal conflict away from crisis. You've built your life on a foundation that someone else controls, and that's a dangerous way to live. Here's what successful people do differently. They treat their income like a business treats revenue, diversified, protected, and constantly growing. They don't put all their financial security in one place. They build multiple streams of income so that no single source has power over their life. They invest aggressively in assets that appreciate rather than spending everything on lifestyle inflation that leaves them impressive but broke. They make financial decisions based on long-term independence rather than short-term comfort. The technique that millionaires use is called the money reset, and it requires confronting every financial decision you've been making on autopilot. You start by tracking every dollar you spend for 30 days, not to judge yourself, but to see where your money actually goes. Most people discover they're hemorrhaging cash on things they don't value. Subscriptions they forgot about, convenience purchases that add up to thousands annually, lifestyle expenses that impress people they don't like. Once you see the reality, you make ruthless cuts. Everything that doesn't actively contribute to your financial independence gets eliminated or reduced. The goal isn't deprivation, it's intentionality. You're redirecting money from things that drain your future to things that build it. That might mean downsizing your living space, driving a less impressive car, or declining social events that require spending you can't afford. It will make you look less successful in the short term, but it's building real security that most people never achieve. Marcus built a business without investors or partners, funding it entirely from his own savings while working a full-time job he hated. For 3 years, he lived in a small apartment, drove a 15-year-old car, and declined every invitation that cost money. His friends thought he was being cheap. His family worried he was isolating himself. But Marcus understood something they didn't. Every dollar he saved was buying his freedom. Every sacrifice he made in the present was an investment in a future where he'd never have to ask permission or compromise his vision. When his business finally reached profitability, Marcus didn't celebrate by upgrading his lifestyle. He kept living below his means and reinvested every dollar back into growth. 5 years later, the business was generating more in a month than his old job paid in a year, and he owned it completely. No investors telling him how to run it, no partners diluting his decisions, no debt limiting his options. He'd built something entirely his own, and the financial independence it provided meant he'd never have to take orders from anyone again. That's the power of financial self-reliance. It's not about the money itself, it's about what the money enables. It gives you the ability to say no to anything that doesn't align with your values. It lets you take risks that could pay off exponentially because you're not risking your survival. It means you never have to stay in a relationship, job, or situation out of financial necessity. You're free in a way that most people, no matter how much they earn, never experience. The strategy for building this independence in 2025 requires understanding something fundamental about wealth creation. You can't save your way to financial freedom in an economy designed to erode cash. You have to invest in assets that grow faster than inflation eats your purchasing power. That means learning about index funds, real estate building businesses, or creating intellectual property that generates passive income. It means developing financial literacy that most people avoid because it seems complicated or boring. Here's the framework top earners use. They allocate their income into 3 buckets: survival, growth, and freedom. Survival covers basic expenses at the minimum acceptable level. Growth goes into investments that compound over time. Freedom is the emergency fund that gives them the security to take calculated risks. They optimize ruthlessly to minimize survival costs and maximize growth investments, understanding that every dollar in growth today is exponentially more valuable than spending it on lifestyle upgrades. The resistance to this approach is intense because it requires delaying gratification in a culture built on immediate consumption. You'll be judged for not keeping up with peers who are financing impressive lifestyles they can't actually afford. You'll feel behind when friends buy houses or cars you could technically afford, but choose not to purchase. But here's what you'll gain: options that others don't have, security that can't be taken away, and the freedom to pursue opportunities without fear of financial ruin. Financial self-sufficiency transforms every other dimension of independence you've been building. Your time becomes more valuable when you're not selling it out of desperation. Your emotional resilience grows when financial stress isn't constantly triggering your survival instincts. Your ability to maintain boundaries strengthens when you don't need anyone's financial support to survive. Money isn't everything, but financial independence makes everything else possible. The path from financial dependence to true self-reliance takes time, often years of disciplined decisions that feel restrictive in the moment. But those years pass either way, and you'll either arrive at financial freedom or remain trapped by obligations you resent. The choice is whether you're willing to sacrifice comfort today for independence tomorrow. And here's where things get particularly interesting. Once you've built financial independence, you still need to protect it from the people who will try to take it. Not through theft, but through emotional manipulation, guilt, and demands disguised as love. That's where boundaries become critical, because financial self-sufficiency without the ability to say no is just wealth waiting to be drained by everyone who thinks they deserve a piece of what you've built. Chapter 6. Selective Connection. Why winners choose quality over quantity. The most successful people you know probably have smaller social circles than you'd expect. While everyone else is networking frantically, collecting contacts, and maintaining hundreds of shallow relationships, top performers are doing the opposite. They've ruthlessly curated their inner circles, keeping only people who add genuine value to their lives and cutting everyone else loose without guilt. This isn't antisocial behavior, it's strategic self-protection. Here's what most people get wrong about connection. They believe more relationships equal more opportunities, more support, and more success. So they say yes to every social invitation, maintain friendships out of obligation rather than genuine connection, and spend enormous energy managing relationships with people who drain them. They confuse quantity with quality, and they pay for it with exhausted energy reserves and a life filled with people who don't actually matter. Self-reliant people understand a truth that sounds harsh, but changes everything. Most relationships are net negative. They take more energy than they give, demand more time than they're worth, and pull you away from what actually matters. This doesn't make those people bad. It just means they're not aligned with where you're going. And the kindest thing you can do, both for yourself and for them, is to create distance before resentment builds. Mark Zuckerberg famously wears the same gray t-shirt every day to eliminate decision fatigue. But his approach to relationships follows the same minimalist principle. Despite having billions of social media friends through Facebook, his actual inner circle is remarkably small and carefully protected. He spends his time with people who challenge his thinking, share his vision, and operate at his level of intensity. Everyone else gets professional courtesy, but not access to his personal life or decision-making process. This selective approach isn't cold. It's necessary. When you're building something significant, Every relationship is either fuel or friction. Some people energize you, push you forward, and make you better. Others deplete you, create drama, and pull you backward. The difference isn't about good people versus bad people. It's about alignment. Someone can be wonderful and still wrong for your life if their priorities, values, or energy don't match where you're headed. The technique that high performers use to manage this is called the YEK Energy Inventory, a systematic audit of every significant relationship in your life. You list everyone you interact with regularly and honestly assess whether each relationship adds energy or drains it. Does talking to this person leave you feeling energized and motivated, or exhausted and frustrated? After spending time together, do you feel inspired to work harder, or do you feel like procrastinating? Does this person celebrate your wins, or do they subtly undermine your confidence? The answers reveal patterns most people never consciously recognize. You discover that the friend you've had since childhood actually resents your success and constantly tries to pull you back to where you were. You realize that certain family members drain your energy every time you interact, leaving you emotionally depleted for hours afterward. You notice that some colleagues take far more than they give, treating you like an emotional support system while contributing nothing to your actual goals. Once you see these patterns clearly, you face a choice that separates self-sufficient people from those who stay stuck. You can either continue maintaining these relationships out of guilt, history, or social obligation, accepting the ongoing energy drain as the price of being a good person. Or you can set boundaries, reduce contact, and in some cases, eliminate these relationships entirely, freeing that energy for people and pursuits that actually matter. Jim Rohn popularized the idea that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and research consistently supports this principle. Your income, your habits, your mindset, and even your health tend to converge toward the average of your closest relationships. This means that keeping energy-draining people in your inner circle isn't just uncomfortable, it's actively sabotaging your potential. Every hour spent with someone who pulls you down is an hour not spent with someone who could lift you up. The practical application is uncomfortable but necessary. You identify your current 5 closest relationships and ask whether those are the people you want shaping your future. If the answer is no, you begin the process of changing your circle. This doesn't mean cruelty or dramatic confrontations. It means gradually reducing contact with people who don't serve your growth and deliberately increasing time with people who do. You stop initiating plans with energy vampires. You become less available for conversations that go nowhere. You protect your time and attention for relationships that actually matter. The resistance to this approach comes from 2 places: guilt and fear. Guilt tells you that cutting people off makes you a bad person, that you owe ongoing access to anyone who's been part of your life. Fear whispers that you'll end up alone, that being selective means isolation. But both guilt and fear are lying to you. Setting boundaries makes you honest, not cruel. And being alone is infinitely better than being surrounded by people who drain your life force. Research from 2024 shows that relationship quality matters exponentially more than quantity for both happiness and success. People with 3 close, high-quality relationships report higher life satisfaction than those with dozens of shallow connections. The depth of connection, mutual support, and shared values matter far more than the number of people you can call friends. Quality relationships amplify your potential. Low-quality relationships compound your problems. Self-reliant people build their social lives around this principle. They maintain a small inner circle of people who genuinely add value, and they're perfectly comfortable keeping everyone else at a distance. They'd rather have 2 friends who understand and support their vision than 20 acquaintances who expect them to stay small. They'd rather eat alone than share a table with people who drain their energy. They've made peace with the fact that most people won't make the cut, and they're not apologizing for it. The transformation that comes from curating your relationships is profound. Your energy levels stabilize because you're not constantly managing drama or absorbing other people's negativity. Your focus sharpens because the people around you support your goals rather than questioning them. Your confidence grows because you're no longer surrounded by voices telling you what you can't do. And your progress accelerates because you've eliminated the friction that was slowing you down. But being selective about who gets access to your life requires one more crucial skill that most people lack: the ability to set and maintain boundaries without guilt. You can identify toxic relationships and understand why they need to change. But if you can't actually say no when people push against your limits, nothing changes. That's where boundaries become your final line of defense. Chapter 7. The Resilience Factor. Why self-sufficient people bounce back faster. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about how fast you get back up when life knocks you down. And the speed of that recovery directly correlates to how self-sufficient you've become. People who depend on external support to process setbacks take longer to recover because they're waiting for someone else to fix them, validate them, or tell them it's going to be okay. Self-reliant people don't wait. They process, adapt, and move forward because they've built the internal infrastructure to handle crisis without external scaffolding. The difference becomes obvious during major disruptions. When the 2020 pandemic hit and the world shut down, some people crumbled while others pivoted and thrived. The distinction wasn't about luck or resources. It was about psychological self-sufficiency. People who'd already developed the ability to self-regulate, make decisions independently, and maintain their sense of purpose without external validation adapted quickly. Those who depended on external structures, social validation, and other people's guidance fell apart and stayed there. Howard Schultz grew up in poverty in Brooklyn. Watching his father struggle after workplace injuries left him unable to work. When Schultz tried to transform Starbucks from a small coffee bean retailer into what it is today, investors rejected him repeatedly. The original founders refused to sell. Banks wouldn't finance his vision. Everyone told him his idea wouldn't work. He could have accepted that consensus reality and moved on. Instead, he raised money independently, bought the company, and built it into a global phenomenon worth billions. When Starbucks hit crisis points later, including during the 2008 financial collapse, Schultz returned as CEO and rebuilt the company from near bankruptcy. His ability to bounce back repeatedly came from never depending on external validation for his vision or his worth. This kind of resilience isn't innate. It's built through developing specific capabilities that self-sufficient people practice deliberately. The first is psychological flexibility. The ability to adapt your thinking and behavior when circumstances change rather than rigidly insisting the world should match your expectations. Psychologically flexible people don't waste energy fighting reality. They accept what is, adjust their strategy, and move forward. People who lack this flexibility get stuck in anger, denial, or victimhood, burning energy on how things should be, while the opportunity to adapt passes them by. The technique that top performers use to build this flexibility is called the crisis protocol, a pre-planned system for handling unexpected disruptions. You create this during calm periods, not during crisis, so that when chaos hits, you have a framework to follow rather than making panicked decisions. The protocol has 3 phases. First, stabilize. Stop the bleeding. Make whatever immediate decisions are necessary to prevent further damage without worrying about solving everything at once. Second, assess. Once you've stabilized, evaluate what actually happened, what resources you still have, and what options exist going forward. Third, adapt. Based on that assessment, create a new plan that works with current reality, not the reality you wish you had. Most people skip straight to panic when crisis hits because they don't have a protocol. They make emotional decisions under stress, often making situations worse. They call everyone they know, seeking reassurance and advice, getting contradictory information that increases confusion. They freeze in analysis paralysis, unable to decide on a direction because every option feels wrong. Self-sufficient people activate their protocol instead. They know what to do first because they've decided in advance. They don't need to call anyone for permission or reassurance because the protocol gives them a framework for action. The psychological foundation underneath this protocol is something researchers call internal locus of control. The belief that your outcomes are primarily determined by your own actions rather than external circumstances or other people's decisions. People with internal locus of control recover from setbacks faster because they immediately focus on what they can control and change. People with external locus of control stay stuck because they're waiting for circumstances to improve or for someone else to fix things. You can develop this orientation deliberately by tracking your response to small setbacks. When something goes wrong, notice whether your first thought is about what you can do differently or about how unfair the situation is. Notice whether you immediately start problem solving or immediately start complaining. The pattern you follow in small disruptions is the pattern you'll default to in major crises. If you want to be more resilient during big setbacks, start building the habit of taking ownership during small ones. The connection to solitude becomes obvious here. When you regularly spend time alone with your thoughts, processing your experiences without external input, you develop what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to sit with uncomfortable emotions without immediately trying to escape or get someone else to make them go away. This tolerance is crucial for resilience because setbacks are inherently uncomfortable. If you can't tolerate that discomfort long enough to think clearly and make good decisions, you'll make reactive choices that often make things worse. Self-sufficient people have practiced being uncomfortable alone so many times that discomfort no longer triggers panic or the desperate need for external soothing. They can sit in uncertainty, process difficult emotions, and make clear-headed decisions even when everything feels wrong. This doesn't mean they don't feel the pain or difficulty. It means they've developed the capacity to feel it without being overwhelmed by it. And that capacity is what allows them to act effectively under pressure. There's also a practical component to resilience that connects directly to the financial independence we discussed earlier. When you've built multiple income streams, maintained an emergency fund, and lived below your means, financial crises don't destroy you. You have buffer. You have options. You can make strategic decisions rather than desperate ones. People who live paycheck to paycheck and depend on a single income source have no buffer, which means any disruption becomes catastrophic. Their lack of financial self-sufficiency makes them psychologically fragile because they're constantly one problem away from disaster. The transformation that comes from building true resilience is profound. You stop living in fear of setbacks because you know you can handle them. You take bigger risks because you trust your ability to recover if things go wrong. You make bolder decisions because you're not paralyzed by what-if scenarios. And when crisis inevitably comes, you respond with effectiveness rather than panic, often emerging stronger than you were before the disruption. But resilience alone, while crucial, only protects you from breaking. It doesn't create breakthroughs. For that, You need something else that self-sufficient people have mastered, something that happens most powerfully in the spaces between all the noise and demands. You need the ability to think originally, to generate ideas that don't come from group consensus or conventional wisdom. That's where innovation lives, and it's the next dimension we need to explore. Chapter 8: The Innovation Advantage. Why genius happens in solitude. Every breakthrough idea you've ever heard about was conceived in solitude. Not in brainstorming meetings, not during networking events, not through collaborative group think sessions. Someone, alone with their thoughts, made a connection that nobody else had made, saw a possibility that others had missed, and developed a vision that contradicted conventional wisdom. Innovation doesn't come from crowds. It comes from individuals who've spent enough time in their own minds to think originally. This contradicts everything modern work culture tells you. Companies celebrate collaboration, insist on open office plans, and fill calendars with meetings designed to generate ideas through group interaction. But research consistently shows that brainstorming groups produce fewer and lower quality ideas than individuals working alone. The presence of others, rather than enhancing creativity, actually inhibits it. People self-censor to avoid judgment, conform to group consensus to fit in, and focus more on social dynamics than on genuine problem-solving. Steve Jobs understood this principle deeply. While Apple became known for innovation, Jobs didn't generate his breakthrough ideas in conference rooms. He took long, solitary walks, sometimes for hours, using that time alone to think through complex problems without distraction or input. The ideas that revolutionized personal computing, music distribution, and mobile phones didn't come from committees. They came from Jobs spending time in his own mind, connecting dots that others hadn't connected, and trusting his vision even when everyone else thought he was wrong. The neuroscience behind this pattern is clear. Your brain has two distinct modes of thinking. The executive network activates when you're focused on specific tasks, following instructions, or engaging with others. The default mode network activates when you're not focused on anything particular, when your mind wanders freely without external input. This default mode is where creativity happens. It's where your brain makes unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, generates novel solutions to problems, and produces genuine insights rather than variations on existing ideas. But here's the critical point. The default mode network only activates when you're alone and unstimulated. If you're constantly consuming content, responding to messages, or engaging with others, your executive network stays active, and your default mode never engages. You never enter the mental state where breakthrough thinking becomes possible. This is why people who fill every moment with noise and distraction rarely have original ideas. They've disabled the very brain mode that generates innovation. The technique that creative geniuses use is called solo brainstorm, and it's deceptively simple. You set aside dedicated time, minimum 1 hour, where you're completely alone without any external input. No phone, no music, no background noise. Just you and a blank page or screen. You write down a problem or question you're trying to solve, and then you let your mind wander around it without forcing anything. You capture whatever thoughts emerge, no matter how strange or impractical they seem. You don't judge, you don't edit, you just record. The first few times you try this, your brain will resist. You'll feel bored, restless, convinced that nothing useful is happening. That discomfort is your mind adjusting to operating without external stimulation. If you push through it and make this a regular practice, something remarkable begins to happen. Ideas start emerging that you couldn't have accessed through any other method. Connections appear between concepts you'd never linked before. Solutions present themselves to problems you'd been struggling with for months. Throughout history, Breakthrough innovations followed this pattern. Einstein developed the theory of relativity while working alone in a patent office, not through collaboration with other physicists. Nikola Tesla conceived the alternating current motor during a solitary walk. J.K. Rowling developed the entire Harry Potter universe during long periods alone, first while commuting, and later while writing in cafes by herself. The pattern repeats endlessly. Periods of intense solitude produce insights that change everything. This doesn't mean collaboration has no value. Once you've generated an original idea through solitary thinking, collaboration can help refine it, identify problems, and implement it effectively. But the initial spark, the creative insight that makes everything else possible, almost always comes from time spent alone with your own thoughts. If you never give yourself that time, you're limiting yourself to incremental improvements on existing ideas rather than genuine innovation. The practical application requires protecting time for solo thinking the same way you protect time for important meetings. You schedule it, defend it against interruptions, and treat it as non-negotiable. This becomes especially critical if your work requires creativity, strategic thinking, or problem-solving. The hour you spend alone, thinking deeply without distraction, is often more valuable than an entire day of meetings and collaborative work. There's also a confidence component to innovation that connects directly to self-sufficiency. Original ideas, by definition, contradict what most people believe or do. When you generate a genuinely innovative idea, the first response from others is usually skepticism or rejection. If you need external validation to believe in your ideas, you'll abandon them the moment people push back. But if you've developed the self-trust we discussed earlier, if you've learned to value your own judgment over group consensus, you can maintain conviction in your vision, even when nobody else sees it yet. Think about what this means for your competitive advantage. Most people outsource their thinking to experts, influencers, and group consensus. They read the same books, consume the same content, and arrive at the same conclusions as everyone else in their field. They're not thinking originally because they're not giving themselves the space and solitude that original thinking requires. If you make solo thinking a regular practice, you'll generate insights and solutions that your competitors literally cannot access because they've never developed the capacity for it. The transformation that comes from regular solo thinking is profound. You stop feeling dependent on others for ideas because you trust your own creative capacity. You approach problems with genuine curiosity rather than immediately seeking external answers. You develop a reputation for original thinking because you're actually thinking originally rather than repackaging consensus views. And you build the kind of strategic advantage that compounds over time as you generate insights that others miss. But innovation alone, while valuable, doesn't translate to success without one final dimension of self-sufficiency. You need the ability to trust your own judgment completely, to make critical decisions without seeking validation, and to stand by those decisions when everyone else doubts you. That's where self-trust becomes the ultimate competitive advantage. And it's what separates people who have good ideas from people who actually execute them. Chapter 9. Self-trust. The ultimate competitive advantage. Self-trust is the foundation everything else is built on. You can develop emotional independence, master your time, build financial security, and generate brilliant ideas. But if you don't trust your own judgment when it matters most, you'll still seek permission, second-guess critical decisions, and hand your power to people who don't deserve it. Self-trust is what allows you to act decisively when everyone else is frozen in doubt, to maintain conviction when the crowd disagrees, and to stand alone when necessary without crumbling under the pressure. Most people never develop real self-trust because they've spent their entire lives outsourcing decisions to authorities, experts, and consensus. They ask what they should study, what career they should pursue, who they should marry, where they should live. They treat their own judgment as unreliable, something that needs constant verification from external sources before it can be trusted. And because they never practice trusting themselves on small decisions, they're paralyzed when big decisions arrive. Oprah Winfrey built a media empire worth billions by trusting her instincts about what content would resonate with audiences, often against the advice of executives and consultants. When she left her successful talk show to launch OWN, her cable network, everyone predicted failure. Industry experts said the model wouldn't work. Financial advisors questioned the risk. But Oprah trusted her vision and her ability to create something meaningful. Even when the first few years were difficult and critics claimed she'd made a catastrophic mistake. That self-trust, developed over decades of making decisions independently, allowed her to persist through challenges that would have broken someone who needed external validation to continue. The development of self-trust follows a specific pattern. It starts with making small decisions independently and accepting full responsibility for the outcomes, whether they work or not. Each time you make a decision without seeking approval, you build evidence that you can handle the consequences. Each time you trust your judgment and it proves correct, your confidence in your own assessment grows. And perhaps most importantly, each time you make a mistake and recover from it without falling apart, you prove to yourself that bad outcomes aren't catastrophic. This last point is crucial. People who lack self-trust avoid making independent decisions because they're terrified of being wrong. They believe that if they make a bad decision without consulting others, they'll be exposed as incompetent or stupid. But people with strong self-trust understand that mistakes are inevitable and manageable. They're not afraid of being wrong because they've proven to themselves repeatedly that they can adjust, adapt, and ultimately succeed even after making errors in judgment. The technique that builds this capacity is called the decision journal, a systematic practice of documenting your decisions, the reasoning behind them, and their outcomes. Every time you make a significant decision, you write down what you decided, why you decided it, what you expected to happen, and what actually happened. Over time, this journal becomes evidence of your decision-making capability. You see patterns in when your judgment was accurate and when it wasn't. You identify blind spots you can correct. And most importantly, you build undeniable proof that you can think effectively and handle the consequences of your choices. The psychological shift this creates is profound. When you have a journal full of decisions you made independently that turned out well, you stop needing other people to validate your thinking. When you have documented evidence of recovering from mistakes, you stop fearing bad outcomes. Your self-trust stops being a hopeful belief and becomes a demonstrated fact, backed by data you've collected about your own capability. There's a specific moment that tests self-trust more than any other. When you have to make a high-stakes decision that contradicts what everyone around you believes is right. This is where most people crack. The pressure to conform, to trust the wisdom of crowds, to avoid standing alone becomes overwhelming. They abandon their own judgment and defer to consensus, even when their instincts scream that the crowd is wrong. People with genuine self-trust make the opposite choice. They trust what they see, what they know, and what their analysis tells them, even when standing alone feels terrifying. This scenario plays out repeatedly in business. Founders build successful companies, and boards of directors pressure them to sell to larger corporations for substantial payouts. Investors want the exit. CFOs say the offers are too good to refuse. Lawyers advise taking the deals. Everyone with a stake in the decision aligns. Sell and walk away rich. But if the founder's instincts say the business has far more potential independently, if they believe the acquiring company will destroy what makes the product special, they face a brutal test of self-trust. Turning down that consensus requires believing in your own assessment more than you believe in the collective wisdom of experienced advisors. Many founders cave to that pressure, accepting deals they later regret when they watch their former companies get dismantled or stagnate under new ownership. But those who trust themselves enough to stand alone, to work through months of doubt while everyone insists they made a mistake, often prove their judgment was right. The companies they refuse to sell become worth far more than any early offer could have provided. This is the competitive advantage that self-trust provides. When everyone else is looking around for confirmation before acting, you're already in motion. When others are paralyzed by conflicting expert opinions, you're executing based on your own analysis. When the crowd panics during uncertainty, you're calm because you trust your ability to assess situations and make adjustments as needed. That speed, that decisiveness, that lack of hesitation compounds into an advantage that's almost impossible for less self-reliant people to match. The connection to solitude becomes obvious here. Self-trust develops through spending time alone with your thoughts, making decisions without external input, and processing the outcomes independently. If you're constantly seeking validation, constantly consuming others' opinions, constantly checking what everyone else thinks before deciding, you never develop the internal reference point that self-trust requires. You remain dependent on external verification, which means you're always slower, less decisive, and less confident than people who've learned to trust themselves completely. Think about how this manifests in everyday decisions. You're offered a job opportunity that looks impressive on paper, but your gut tells you something is wrong. Everyone you consult tells you to take it because the salary and title are excellent. If you lack self-trust, you override your instincts and accept the job, often discovering within months that your initial gut feeling was accurate. If you trust yourself, you decline the offer despite the pressure, trusting that something better aligned with your intuition will appear. Or you have an idea for a business, creative project, or career change that excites you but seems risky. Every person you talk to lists reasons it won't work, problems you'll face, and safer alternatives you should consider instead. Without self-trust, you abandon the idea or modify it so much to address everyone's concerns that it becomes something you no longer feel passionate about. With self-trust, you acknowledge the risks, plan for the problems, and move forward anyway, because you trust your assessment of the opportunity more than you trust others' fears projected onto your situation. The transformation that self-trust creates extends into every area of life. Your relationships improve because you're not seeking validation from partners. You're choosing people based on genuine compatibility and mutual respect. Your career accelerates because you're making moves based on your own strategic assessment rather than waiting for someone to give you permission to advance. Your creative output increases because you're producing work that reflects your actual vision rather than what you think will please critics or audiences. But self-trust alone isn't enough to protect the independence you've built. You also need the ability to defend it against people who will try to take it from you. Not through force, but through guilt, obligation, and the manipulation of your empathy. That's where boundaries become your final line of defense. And it's the last dimension of self-sufficiency we need to master. Chapter 10. Boundaries. The silent power move of the self-sufficient boundaries are the invisible force field that protects everything you've built. You can master solitude, develop emotional independence, control your time, achieve financial security, and trust yourself completely. But if you can't set and maintain boundaries, all of that gets drained by people who feel entitled to access you, your resources, and your energy whenever they want. Boundaries aren't walls that isolate you from connection. They're gates that control who gets in, when they get in, and how much they get to take. Most people struggle with boundaries because they confuse them with cruelty. They believe that saying no makes them selfish, that protecting their time means they don't care about others, that refusing unreasonable requests damages relationships. So they say yes when they mean no, give when they can't afford to, and make themselves available when they desperately need rest. They sacrifice their own well-being to avoid feeling guilty, and then they resent the very people they were trying to please. Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, built a billion-dollar company by maintaining fierce boundaries with everyone, including potential investors who wanted to control her vision. When she first pitched the product, every investor and manufacturer told her it wouldn't work and refused to get involved. But instead of compromising her idea to make others comfortable, she held her boundaries firm. She maintained complete ownership of her company, refused to dilute her vision through committees, and said no to partnership deals that would have made her rich faster but would have cost her control. Those boundaries, maintained despite enormous pressure to compromise, are what allowed her to build something entirely on her own terms. The psychology behind boundary setting is straightforward but uncomfortable. Boundaries require you to prioritize your own needs over other people's wants, and that triggers guilt in anyone who's been socialized to believe that being good means being available. You have to disappoint people. You have to say no to requests that aren't actually unreasonable. They just don't align with your priorities. You have to watch people get upset or angry when you stop giving them unlimited access. And you have to be okay with all of that discomfort without backing down. Self-sufficient people have made peace with this reality. They understand that people will always want more from them than they're willing to give. And that's not their problem to solve. They've decided that protecting their time, energy, and resources isn't selfish. It's necessary for their survival and success. They'd rather disappoint someone by saying no than resent them later for saying yes when they shouldn't have. The technique for establishing boundaries is called the boundary blueprint, and it requires you to get brutally clear about 3 things before any situation arises. First, identify your non-negotiables, the limits you absolutely will not cross regardless of who's asking or how they react. These might be time blocks you never give up, financial limits you never exceed, or types of requests you never agree to. Write them down explicitly so you're not making decisions in the moment when emotional pressure is highest. Second, create your default responses for common boundary violations. Most people freeze when someone makes an unreasonable request because they haven't prepared what to say. You need scripts. When someone asks for your time during your protected hours, you need to know exactly what you'll say. I'm not available then. When family asks for financial help you can't afford, you need a prepared response. That's not possible for me right now. When colleagues try to dump their work on you, you need a clear line. I won't be able to take that on. These aren't mean. They're direct and honest, which is far kinder than resentful compliance. Third, implement the 24-hour rule for any request that requires significant time, money, or energy. You don't answer immediately. You say, "Let me think about it," and give yourself a full day to assess whether this aligns with your priorities without the pressure of someone waiting for an answer. This buffer prevents you from making impulse commitments you'll regret later. The resistance you'll face when you start setting boundaries is intense. People who've had unlimited access to you will be angry when that changes. Family members who've relied on you being endlessly available will accuse you of being selfish. Friends who've benefited from your inability to say no will claim you've changed or that success has made you cold. This reaction is predictable and meaningless. What they're actually upset about is losing their privileged access to your resources, and their feelings about that don't obligate you to continue sacrificing yourself. Here's what most people don't understand about boundaries. They improve relationships instead of damaging them. When you set clear limits, people know where they stand with you. They stop testing your boundaries because you've demonstrated you'll enforce them. The relationships that survive your boundaries are the ones worth keeping, because those people respect you enough to honor your limits. The relationships that end were never based on mutual respect anyway. They were based on your compliance. The connection between boundaries and self-sufficiency is absolute. You can't be truly independent if people can guilt you into giving up your time, lending money you need, or sacrificing your goals to serve their comfort. Every boundary violation is a theft of the resources you need to maintain your independence. Every time you fail to enforce a boundary, you're training people that your limits are negotiable and your needs are less important than theirs. Think about how this plays out in real situations. Your sibling asks to borrow money you can't afford to lend, and when you say no, they accuse you of being greedy and remind you of times they helped you. Without boundaries, you lend the money, creating financial stress you didn't need and resentment toward them you didn't have before. With boundaries, you hold firm, accept their anger, and preserve both your financial security and your self-respect. Or your boss habitually emails you on weekends expecting immediate responses, gradually training you that your personal time belongs to the company. Without boundaries, you respond every time, establishing the precedent that you're always available and slowly burning yourself out. With boundaries, you establish that weekends are off limits unless there's a genuine emergency, and you enforce that limit even when it's uncomfortable. The transformation that boundaries create is profound. Your stress decreases dramatically because you're no longer overextended trying to please everyone. Your relationships improve because they're built on honesty rather than resentment. Your respect for yourself grows because you're honoring your own needs instead of treating them as less important than everyone else's wants. And your capacity to maintain the independence you've built becomes unshakable because you've learned to defend it. But here's the final truth about boundaries, the one that most people resist until they're forced to face it. The people who push hardest against your boundaries are often the people closest to you. Family members who believe blood entitles them to unlimited access. Romantic partners who mistake boundaries for lack of love. Longtime friends who expect loyalty to mean endless availability. These are the relationships where boundary setting feels most difficult and most necessary, because these are the people whose demands can most easily drain everything you've worked to build. You've reached the end of what self-sufficiency requires. Solitude to think clearly without constant influence. Emotional independence to process your experiences without needing external regulation. Freedom from seeking validation for your decisions. Control of your time so you spend it on what matters. Financial security that gives you options instead of obligations. Selective relationships with people who add value instead of drama. Resilience to bounce back from setbacks faster. Creative capacity that comes from solo thinking. Trust in your own judgment, even when you stand alone. And boundaries that protect it all from people who would drain it if you let them. What you do with this knowledge determines whether you live on your own terms or continue giving your life away to everyone who asks for a piece of it. The choice has always been yours. Now, you have the tools to make it. Conclusion. The transformation begins now. You started this audiobook searching for something most people never find: true independence. not the superficial kind that comes from having money or living alone, but the deep, unshakable self-sufficiency that means you can stand on your own regardless of what life throws at you or who walks away. You've discovered that this independence isn't a single skill or decision. It's a complete system of capabilities that work together to make you genuinely free. The power of solitude showed you that being alone isn't something to fear, but something to master. When you're comfortable in your own company, when you can sit with your thoughts without needing constant distraction or validation, you access a clarity that people trapped in constant connection never experience. You think more clearly. You make better decisions. You develop ideas that others can't because they never give their minds the quiet space where genuine insight emerges. Emotional independence freed you from needing other people to regulate your feelings. You still experience every emotion fully, but those emotions no longer control your actions or dictate your decisions. You've learned to observe what you feel, understand why you feel it, and choose your response rather than being hijacked by chemical reactions designed for a world that no longer exists. This capacity alone separates you from 90% of people who let their emotional state determine their life trajectory. Breaking free from needing validation changed how you make every significant choice. You no longer poll everyone you know before deciding, desperately seeking permission to trust your own judgment. You've developed an internal compass that guides you based on your own values and analysis, not on what will gain approval or avoid criticism. You make decisions faster, execute them with more conviction, and stand by them even when the crowd disagrees. Time mastery gave you back the hours that everyone else gives away. You control your schedule instead of being controlled by it. You protect your deep work time like the valuable resource it is. You've accepted that disappointing people who want unlimited access to your time is the price of actually accomplishing what matters to you. And you've discovered that the urgent demands that supposedly couldn't wait somehow get handled without you sacrificing your priorities. Financial self-reliance provided the foundation that makes everything else possible. You're building multiple income streams, so no single source has power over your life. You're living below your means and investing the difference. You're creating the financial buffer that transforms crises from catastrophes into manageable challenges. Money alone doesn't buy freedom, but financial dependence guarantees slavery to whoever controls your income. Selective connection taught you that having fewer, higher quality relationships beats having hundreds of shallow connections. You've curated your inner circle ruthlessly, keeping only people who energize you and add value to your life. You've let go of energy vampires without guilt. You've accepted that being alone is infinitely better than being surrounded by people who drain you. And you've discovered that the relationships worth keeping are the ones that survive your boundaries. Resilience showed you how to bounce back from setbacks faster than people who depend on external support systems. You've built internal infrastructure for processing challenges independently. You've developed the psychological flexibility to adapt when circumstances change rather than rigidly insisting reality should match your expectations. And you've proven to yourself that you can handle whatever comes because you've recovered from difficulties before. Innovation capacity revealed why the best ideas come from solitude rather than brainstorming sessions. You've learned to protect time for solo thinking, where your brain's default mode network can make connections that committee thinking never produces. You generate original insights instead of recycling consensus views. And you trust those insights enough to act on them, even when they contradict what everyone else believes. Self-trust gave you the courage to make critical decisions without seeking permission from authorities or experts. You've built evidence through your decision journal that you can assess situations effectively and handle the consequences of your choices. You've stopped fearing mistakes because you've proven you can recover from them. And you've developed conviction that allows you to stand alone when necessary. Boundaries protect everything you've built from people who would drain it if you let them. You've learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize your needs over other people's wants, and to enforce limits even when people you care about push against them. You've discovered that boundaries improve relationships by creating honesty instead of resentment. And you've made peace with the fact that some people will be angry when you stop giving them unlimited access to your resources. This is what self-sufficiency actually means. Not avoiding connection or becoming cold and isolated, but developing such strong internal capabilities that you can choose relationships instead of needing them, that you can stand alone when necessary, and that your well-being doesn't depend on anyone else showing up, staying, or doing what you hope they'll do. The successful people you admire all share this foundation. They're not fundamentally different from you. They simply developed these capabilities earlier, practiced them more consistently, and protected them more fiercely. The room we started with, filled with people who've achieved extraordinary things, is a room you now understand from the inside. The secret they share isn't talent or luck. It's self-sufficiency built through the exact principles you now know. What changes from here depends entirely on what you do next. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. You can understand everything in this audiobook perfectly and still live the same dependent, reactive, people-pleasing life you were living before if you don't actually implement what you've learned. Or you can start today with one small decision made independently, 1 hour protected for solitude, one boundary set clearly, one step toward the financial independence that gives you options. The transformation doesn't happen all at once. It builds gradually as each decision reinforces your self-trust, as each boundary you maintain strengthens your respect for yourself, as each hour in solitude clarifies your thinking. But it does happen. And when it does, you'll look back and barely recognize the person you used to be. The person who needed constant approval, who gave their time to anyone who asked, who let emotions dictate their choices, who handed decision-making power to anyone who seemed confident. That person is gone now. You're someone different, someone who stands alone when necessary, someone who trusts their own judgment, someone who protects their time, energy, and resources because they understand these things aren't infinite. Someone who knows that real strength comes from within, not from how many people surround you. You're not alone in solitude. You're free. And that freedom is what you came here to find.